Are you feeling the burn or the burnout? As many of you guys know, like a lot of Bernie supporters were made up of young people, yet young people are often left out of political conversations. And of course, like with COVID-19, like really ensnaring everything right now, we wanted to know from you guys, how do you guys think that the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the upcoming election right now?
One of the things that me and like my brother were talking about earlier this week was that a lot of people, I think, are seeing kind of how our government leaders are handling this and how they're, I don't know how to say this, how they could be doing a better job. There's steps that they could be taking. And so I think it's impacting it in the way that, or at least for us, one of the things we were saying is like, this is our moment to get politically involved and make those changes, right? Because we don't want another Trump. We can't do another 4 years of this. And so that's kind of how we were looking at it, as this is kind of like pushing us to take part in politics and have our voices heard and, you know, be able to stand up for ourselves.
So to piggyback on what Hosea said about this COVID crisis, how it should be energizing young people to think more about politics. It really should get them thinking about how it affects them really locally, you know, because state by state, we've been seeing all these governors talk about their action plans, and we've been seeing a lot of comparisons between the states and how they're handling the situation. And it should get them thinking about that their vote really matters. And so it matters who they get put in office. You know, of course, you get Trump at the top giving his daily press briefings, which are hilarious and sad at the same time. But it's the people that in the individual states are really having the biggest effect on them. So it should get them thinking about politics on a bigger scale, not just voting in the general. That can also lead to a point I want to get into later about how the youth turnout wasn't as big as, you know, Bernie Sanders wanted or predicted for the primary. It's just more than just a one election every 4 years. It's deeper than that.
Thank you for sharing, Dwayne. I had shared a video in the chat box that I think every single person should watch. And pretty much the gist of it is saying what you just said, Dwayne. It talks a little bit about the survival of the fittest concept and how it relates to folks of color and the pandemic right now. And it has a lot to do with voting. And so a lady talks about it a little bit on her Facebook Live or her Instagram Live, but she pretty much talks about like how this coronavirus is pretty much tied to not giving folks the opportunity to get out and vote in the November elections, and then it's stalling the process. And so I have my own personal ideas about that and my own personal beliefs on that, but I think it ties into a lot of what you were just saying, Dwayne, which we will get into in a little bit.
Really interesting concept too, because even looking at the political process last election, even though Hillary Clinton won the general population votes, you feel me, the electoral college ended up still putting Trump in place. So a lot of people feel helpless, a lot of people feel hopeless. But once again, when it comes down to voting and making sure that you are being an active citizen in your society, you have to get out there and vote when it comes down to the municipal elections, when it comes down to the things that are in your community, when it comes down to the things that are in your county, when it comes down to the things that are in your city. I feel like there's a level of apathy, an appropriate apathy that like young people have about voting because of how everything's kind of played out. That sense of powerlessness is something that we need to combat and like let people know that there are other scales that they need to be looking at. Like instead of focusing every 4 years, what about every 2 years when it comes down to the House of Representatives, when it comes down to the Senate? Those things are more important because those are the people who actually make the laws. Like we spend a lot of time giving it energy thinking about presidency and the executive branch of government. When it comes down to it, the legislative is where we really have the most power, and that's where we, you know, can make the most impact.
I like what you said, Rex. You brought up the apathy and the lack of interest that young people have because they feel maybe defeated by the system. You mentioned the lesser of two evils. You know, that's why it was really important that we got someone on a Democratic ticket to vote for that was inspiring for young people, you know. So that's why that's one of the many reasons why having Senator Sanders not win this time around was disappointing, because he even understood and said that we need a campaign of energy and excitement to bring young people to the polls. You know, having someone like a Joe Biden say they don't believe, for example, that the Electoral College should be abolished, you know. That's just one out of many long list of things that's troubling to me about someone like him being a nominee, because that does not help the situation at all. I'm not entirely, to be real frank and raw honest, I'm not entirely 100% sure what I'm going to do at the top, but I know I'm going to be working to make sure my Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib gets reelected because she has a challenger.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing again, man. For real.
I kind of want to hear from Diane just a little bit because I know you're a senior in high school, probably able to vote now, right, Diane?
By November, I will be.
Okay, cool. So how is this all affecting you?
I don't know. I personally feel like it's kind of like more of a distraction, but then again, we also do have time to like research, you know? But I don't know. I feel like it's been like a big distraction or some way to prolong the process.
Yeah, I feel that.
Anna, can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead, Yvette.
Okay, Dwayne talked about a student voice. I guess my interest comes in, what can we do, you know, within the school system? You know, obviously a lot of change needs to happen, but we don't want to wait till they're 18 to believe whether or not they have a student voice, because if there were practices in place as students in the system, K-12, then they would feel empowered by the time they were eligible to vote. I've had students talk to me and say that even with changes at their school or how they're treated, that they didn't believe that anybody would be listening or their voice mattered or could make a difference. I'm trying to find ways in creating the system so that process is embedded, so that we're turning out students who feel that they matter, you know, and that their voice matters and can make a difference.
My name's Dominic, and I really appreciate the question that you raised, Yvette, because I'm a Sacktown native. It was always a paradox to me that growing up in Sacramento, which is the city of, you know, California's government, I was never really introduced to local government or state government in a way that was like intimate. Like I had not met my mayor. I'd never gone to a city council meeting, and lived 15 minutes away from Capitol, but had never been there, right? And then going to Berkeley, I became a lot more involved, not only in my campus's government policy, but also in like local government. UC Berkeley and Berkeley are very intertwined. I had to leave Sacramento to come back to Sacramento and become more involved in state government. All that to say is, if we're thinking about younger folks, I think exposure to local government and city politics and all that stuff is a wonderful way for students to feel like they can become politically experienced. Field trip to your city council meeting where you get to meet the mayor, and the mayor is the person that's explaining to you why your vote matters and how, you know, a certain group of people, maybe 300, 400 people, were able to get through this certain, you know, local measure that has improved people's lives, right? Like things that are a little bit more tangible than opening a book and learning about your 44th or 45th president, I think is the way to get through to a lot of students who don't have exposure to government outside of their history. That would be my address to that kind of thought exercise.
We have those. We require our students. They go to board meetings. They go to city council meetings. It's part of their government courses. I'm more concerned with our youth that may not be on already that radar. Obviously, I'm dealing with kids that are out of the comprehensive high school, so they already feel like they're not succeeding already. It's getting their voice heard.
Yeah, the point you just made about how you described how in civics classes that they're teaching that stuff already. They're having field trips to the mayor's office and things that Dominique had brought up. And I'm shaking my head hearing the things that Dominique brought up, but I've never seen those in my life, you know. So we know that a lot of classes, a lot of students in America aren't getting that. And I wish that was like a standard thing that was being taught in school. You know, it's a lot of good things they're not teaching our kids in school. You know, they're not teaching, you know, how to do taxes or talking about like tangible things in life, like renting a home and home ownership. These are things that would set someone on the right path, but they're just not taught. And you mentioned that kids that you're dealing with en masse aren't getting that experience. You know, that's a problem. That just, you know, people in low income in schools and situations where their parents aren't there at home, you know, and they're disadvantaged. I've been in Detroit public schools my whole life, and I've never heard of anyone going to the mayor's office for a field trip to learn. I've never heard of that.
Right. Another interesting piece about the way all this is kind of falling down is that, like, along with exposure comes, like, you know, enculturation and like re-education, right? And the reason I say this is because, like, when it comes down to it, people don't understand how the political system works. And I don't think something we should learn in the classroom. I think it's something that we should be experiencing from the first grade on. A lot of people feel like the electoral college is something that they just need to toss out the window. It's something that doesn't really make sense, right? But when you think about what the electoral college is here for, it actually makes a lot of sense because states have different populations. So if you have a state that has like a whole lot of people that agree that this is something that's going to happen, like that kind of makes it unfair, it makes an unfair disparity disparity for the other states who have a lesser population, right? Like these are kind of practices that you can use throughout grade school. So say if you start to enculturate people with the idea that they have the power to change how their experiences happen throughout the year, then they start to understand the power of voting, right? Getting them to understand that voting is a part of life, not like it's not a privilege, it's a part of life. Like I think about people who are from Australia. They're required to vote. Like it's a law. They don't get a chance not to vote because of how their political system has been enculturated in them ever since elementary school. But again, if it's about the culture of voting and understanding like your voice always matters instead of mattering only sometimes, I think that people will start to want to vote on their own. They'll want their voice to be heard, even if it doesn't seem like it's making much of an impact. If you can show them early on, like even those small impacts matter, like I feel like more people would, gravitate toward the idea of using their voice to make change.
Thank you for sharing, Rex.
Yeah, and I also wanted to comment on Yvette's question. And I'm really happy that you posed it because as we're talking about like the youth and like how they feel like so disempowered now to be a part of like the voting or like any political process, like I guess I'm kind of thinking like more like in history towards like the civil rights or like any type of like grassroots movement where like young people, they were the main ones at the forefront that were like protesting, like they're like a lot of the ones that are like doing that work. And so kind of like the question that I kind of have is like what pressures are like youth under now that's preventing them from like being able to show up like how like they did before. I think part of like why young people like gravitated to Bernie so much was because he at least talked about like a lot of issues that relate to them like a lot more. And then I also just kind of just see how like I feel like that representation isn't always kind of seen like within like our, I guess, like political offices or like within like any like forms of government. But like whenever I see people like AOC, somebody who's like really young that's like doing it, that's like in there, I feel like that representation kind of helps create that culture where you feel like they can be like a part of it and like participate in government.
So for me, in my experience, when I was 18, I didn't vote. The way I grew up was don't get involved in anything related to government because that could put, your family on their radar, right? And we don't want to run the risk of being, looked into by any government agency that could ultimately result in like deportation, right? It was just a risk that we were taught not to run with. And so I feel like that also mixed with when you become 18 and you become more educated and you understand that, you still have power with your voice and your story. I think it holds you back because no one around you has ever voted. Do you know what I mean? You're now in uncharted territory. And so I think that especially at 18, 19 years old, it can seem like this huge, scary thing that nobody around you has ever done. And I know a lot of people think, well, you could reach out to like people around you, like teachers or like friends. And yeah, you could. But I also think about the way most people would react when I told them that back when I was like 18. And a lot of times people would be like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? Like, you're crazy. Why didn't you vote? It became more like, oh, like, I'd rather just not even talk about it and keep it to myself, because it seems like when you open up that story, people that don't understand that narrative will kind of look down on you for it. And it took a lot. And it wasn't until like I got into college and I became more educated. And then I started getting more involved with politics at a local level as well. But I feel like that's one of those things that we seem to overlook. And when Yvette was talking about that population of students that don't show up, I think a big part of them could fall under that category. I don't want to assume that, but I just think about my story and how this impacted me, and that's kind of what I see.
You're actually right, Jose. There's a multiple of reasons. Because they're facing other challenges. So, if you're facing your day-to-day challenges, some can be, they don't have models. They don't have models. They don't know anyone. They're first generation. Some are undocumented. Some are in depression mode. There are a lot of mental health issues that we're dealing with. There are a lot of family issues that we're dealing with. So like in the K-12, because really, our job is how are we preparing them? So at 18, when they are given that opportunity to go out there and advocate for themselves, advocate for their communities, or just be advocates, what are we doing to prep them for that? And if they don't believe their voice mattered up until that point, it's really hard then to get them to think their voice is all of a sudden going to matter. You know, we didn't equip them with those skills. I always ask the question, where are they given the opportunity to just talk? You know, and building that relationship with adult figures that are there with them, because it takes a special adult to work in that system as well. So where is that relationship being built and cultivated so that they're given that opportunity to learn how to advocate and have dialogue?
I swear you're like reading my mind right now. Because like all of the politicians say that young people don't vote, so their conversation is tailored to older people. Mm-hmm. People like Bernie Sanders who try to go to, you know, connecting with the young people, he focuses so much on the young people that, you know what I mean, it makes it, the older people kind of look at him like, all right, we don't need to focus on you, because again, we have a really ageist system in our country where you feel like the only way that you're going to be able to manage anything is if you're old enough to do so, if you have enough experience and time to do so. So it's like, if you're in that kind of system where people are feeling like young people, they're not going to make the best decision for the country because they don't really know, you feel me, heads from tails. And then you got the older people who are like, look, we're not really worried about young people issues. We don't need to talk to them. Of course, they're going to be missing in the conversation. Of course, they're going to feel like this isn't for them. Of course, they're going to feel like my voice doesn't matter because no one is even trying to hear them speak. No one is speaking to them. It's like they're saying that we're here, but they're treating us like children where we need to be seen but not heard. And that's something that's impacting the way that our political systems work, especially with the increase of young people, you know, as time goes on. Like there's so many young people who actually do have ideas about how to fix things in the country, but they don't feel like people are going to listen to them. They don't feel like they can come together or have a platform to actually make any political headway. Just because based on their experience and how they've been in culture and the things that they've looked around and seen. When that's all said and done, how then do I take myself to pretty much settle for the person who's talking to me the most when no one's talking to me? Like it's a horrible system for young people. It's not something that's inviting to them. It's not something that allows them to, you know, speak their real truths. And that's why I feel like it's crumbling the way it's crumbling in regards to young people, because it doesn't feel like it's a system that's created for them.
One of the aha moments that I had was at our community day school with the student. I was actually talking to the administrator there. I thought it was a simple question, but it gave me an aha moment that we didn't even think of the simple things. Like, so I just said, well, what do your students say? That was the question I asked, you know. He replied, you know, funny that you said that because I had one student share with me what they felt they needed. I said, can I have a conversation with that student? He was dumbfounded. He said, I wouldn't have thought anything that I said to our administrator would have got to the district office, or that somebody from there would want to come down and hear my thoughts. We run the school as if the students don't care, because obviously they got kicked out of their comprehensive school. He said, but it's not that I don't care. I just made poor choices. And while I'm here, I don't want to waste my time. So I would like some better instruction than what I'm getting. As simple as that. We created a whole plan on how to help support the teachers to better connect with the students. And I had to give that student credit. So a 20-minute conversation actually changed the structure at that school. We're not providing the opportunity to hear student voice in a sustainable, systematic way that it gets embedded in what we do every day. And voting really is the prime of having your voice be heard. I just need to figure out ways to get students to believe that, you know, in the system that I have to work with.
I want to uplift and even thank Yvette. I don't know you, but as I kind of grow in this movement, going through the criminal justice system, you already know some of the things that I went through. I've always, and even now, to whom much is given, much is required. Like I still, as I'm not as young, I still volunteer at the schools in a way where I just literally go to show up to listen and just feel them. And when issues arise, and I want to encourage us, because all of us on this particular Zoom, and thank you for having me, I almost feel like there's a shared understanding in a way where like we have to uplift those who may not feel comfortable to talk. You see what I'm saying? So with my role at Aspen Institute, and even as the president of Youth Build internationally right now, it's almost like, you know, as we grow, the uplift is real. Like, you know what I mean? People say, you give back, whatever the case may be. I'm like, no, it's just can't connect it to my roots in a way where even just taking like the streets, you already know, it's like the spidey senses. You know a cop, even if he got his it's like, there's some things that you could just feel with being with the young people and just kind of relating, even what Jose was saying. Like when I was growing up, voting was like F the system. You see what I'm saying? So there's a level of understanding that you have to be patient. And as we grow our consciousness, we arise and we awaken each other. So thank you for letting me share. Much respect. Keep up the good work, y'all.
Yeah, no, thank you all for sharing. Like, I feel like a really important thing that you guys have all like really touched on, like what Rex was saying with this being like a very ageist system, is that like youth and like their voice is like very like undermined. It's very underestimated like throughout all of this. And that's why I like what you said, like with us being like a youth-led like organization and like trying to like figure out like what they want. I feel like a lot of the times like we forget to just like ask them, like we forget that like they're very intelligent, like they're very smart. The fact that like they were able to like give like that insight and like they were able to like help change like the entire structure of it just like shows that like the power that like they do have. But since we don't hold space for them like we do like on this platform, like they aren't given like that opportunity like to share. And like from there, I guess like I just wanted to be able to pose like the next question is that like, how do we continue to like empower youth to stay like engaged? Like, I feel like if they understood like the consequences of like them not voting and like them not showing up to the polls, then they would be like more encouraged to say to be able to participate.
I mean, I wouldn't want to say use that term because make it feel like it's like a gun to the head, or like the lesser of two evils thing that happens every November. Like if you don't do this, because that shaming. A lot of people are feeling that right now. That shaming doesn't work. I feel like just keeping them empowered and informed, and letting them know from jump all the issues, asking them what the issues are, and letting them know how those issues are there because of not taking action and voting.
Yes, no, thank you so much for calling me out on that. I like what you said, like about just like the empower aspect, because I think that's like why I brought up like the historical part about like how vital like the youth were previously and being able to thread like the needle like towards change. And I feel like if they knew like how integral like they were in the past, like they would be able to like see how much like more effective that they could be like in the present.
When it comes down to like really encouraging people, what are we voting about? Like, you know what I'm saying? Are the things that we vote about impacting young people? Because, well, not that they're not impacting young people, because everything impacts the young people, right? But what I'm saying is, it's going to be hard pressed to get people who don't care about something, because like that's the general consensus about our young people, right? They don't care, right? It's going to be hard to get people who don't care about something to care about something that doesn't involve them, or to care about something that is so far removed from them that they feel like they can care about it later. You know what I'm saying? Things like Social Security, all that stuff. Those are the conversations that are being had about like what we're going to do. Even what's on the docket is dictated by people who are older. It's like all of these things that we're supposed to be selective and have a voice on the issues. Again, the legislators made these things. You talked about like people back in the days, Aaron, for real, young people back in the days, what they did not settle for people not talking to them. So they created the conversation. They didn't settle for people saying that they were too young. They didn't settle for people saying that they don't have a voice. They didn't settle for any of that stuff because their situation was so rigid, and so they weren't comfortable. We're also in a luxury of technology, and we can kind of relax and just like wait for things to happen. They didn't have any of that stuff. If they wanted to go see something happen, if they wanted to see change, they knew that they had to band together with people, like-minded people, and go out there and make it, no matter the consequence. And I don't feel like all of us are ready to deal with those kind of consequences because we live so comfortably. Everything that we have is so existential to us, and we're saturated in so much information. It's an overload. It's too much responsibility to expect one person to be able to navigate through on their own. And that's why I feel like these kind of conversations, these kind of communities are important, because then you can iron out the details that some people don't understand. You can talk to them about things that like may seem too grand for them and have them understand like together it's not as grand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I loved everything that you said, and I feel like it helped me like understand, I guess, like a way for me to like better like word it is just like the whole idea of like risk. Like, what are you like willing to like risk in order to like see like the changes that you want? Like, what are you willing to give up in order to see like what changes that like you want to see like in the world? And I think you are right. Like, we aren't having like those conversations at like a young age because we are like pretty comfortable like the way that we are. But I feel like as like you get older and like as you mature and like you start to understand like things that you don't like about the world, I feel like then like you do start to, I guess, understand like, okay, like, you know what, I think I'm like willing to like give this up if it's going to get me like something bigger like in the end. So I really liked everything that you shared. So thank you so much for that, Rex.
My analysis of, you know, kind of tying everything together is that young people care about student debt, the environment, because they feel as if that's their burden to bear, and not going to war. No one wants to get drafted. So like, if I'm young and I am, those are three things I care about because they've all impacted me. I don't want to go to war. I don't want to inherit a world where everything's burning, and you know, I don't want to be in debt for 50 years. So those are things I think many young people care about. But I've had to think through those things in a way. I didn't necessarily come to those conclusions on my own. There was a collective kind of conversation that was happening on a national level that allowed me to kind of say, oh yeah, I do care. Actually, you know what, that is applicable to me. I should care more about that, shouldn't I? So I do wonder how other folks, especially folks that are coming right out of high school, kind of come to those conclusions, or if they do, and if they do, you know, what are those things that they care about?
To add on what you were saying, Dominic, personally, since I am class of 2020 and we're like getting out of high school, like kind of like virtually graduating and everything, I feel like we care more about like mental health and our environment and saving sea turtles, only because of the fact that those are things that impact us or we see like more worthy, and we all personally go through those things.
Thank you for sharing, Diane. That's real talk right there. So I just wanted to shout out every single one of you who've already shared and just say thank you for being willing to risk courageously and share with us. Like, I know a lot of us on this call right here don't necessarily know each other as much. And so just for us to connect the way that we are right now and the way that this conversation is flowing and moving forward, I think is really powerful. And I just want to shout out the youngest person on the call just now who was able to share with us how she really felt. Any of you who work with young folks, if you want to invite them to these calls, we would be more than happy and willing to have them on this call so that they could feel supported and so that they could learn from one another and learn from all of us as well. Like, I just learned a lot from every single one of you who were able to share today. Brother Rex is like a human encyclopedia. He's always spitting knowledge. Dwayne out here from Detroit, giving all of your personality, which I love. Dominic, shout out to you. And shout out for Tiffany getting you involved. Noelle, we always love seeing your face. Bree, hey Bree, it's good to see you. It's been a minute, sis. Jose, Rex, Aaron, Bro Jamil, Diane, Yvette, thank you all for being a part of this call, every single one of you. I know Bina and Greg from Cities Rise was on this call too. I don't know where they went. They probably had a different meeting that they had to get on, but I'll just send them an email just to follow up with them. But like I said, y'all, this is our virtual community that we want to create every single Friday. And from these calls, we hope to build out a stronger community. As soon as this whole pandemic, this lockdown lifts, we're hoping to have a young leaders mobilization happening so that we can continue advocating for issues like this that we all truly feel matter. And we're also going to have topics like this being discussed all the way up until November. So this is not just going to be the only conversation we have on politics and on the upcoming election in November. But we do want you all to understand that we're here to empower your voice, give you a platform to speak your truth, and to also understand that although all this pandemic stuff is happening, that the elections are not on hold. And so to continue on that path where it's like this all matters, and to be tuned in to all that information. And so those are my last thoughts, y'all. I hope to see you next Friday on our call, our street talk. We'll put out some information about it. Follow us on social media. And then I'll also send out emails. So look out for an email from me just detailing what happened on this call and then everything for our next call.
Thank you, Anna, for the space. You always hold it down. Do it.
Thank you.
See y'all later. Bye, Diane.
Bye.
Peace and love, y'all. Peace and love.